In today's video, we uncover the chilling mystery of a young woman who went to bed one night and was never seen again. One college student didn't come home from a friend's house in the middle of the night while everyone else was sleeping in the room next door. Strange things were not seen or heard, but she wasn't there in the morning. The police were called right away, and the case became the city's most talked about story right away. After following thousands of leads, detectives finally found the shocking truth that shook the whole country to its core. Brianna Dennison was born in Reno, Nevada on March 29, 1988. It was where she grew up with her parents and younger brother. When she was 6, her father suddenly died. The death hurt the whole family, but it made Brianna love her mom even more, and her mom did everything she could to help. Her family also liked to go on trips. Brianna saw a lot of Europe. She went to Japan and even spent a year as a student exchange student in Italy. She went to California to attend Santa Barbara City College after finishing high school. She chose to become a child psychologist because she had always wanted to work with kids. Not long after moving to Santa Barbara, she made friends right away and began dating a guy. Brainy, then 19, took a break from college in the winter of 2008 and went back to Reno to spend time with her family and friends. That Friday, January 18th, she went to her best friend's house with another friend to spend the weekend with them. They planned their days so that they could ski during the day and go to shows and nightclubs at night. Bryn was going to see one of her favorite bands perform live on January 19th, but she got sick and couldn't go. Brianna decided she didn't want to miss it because her mom told her to go anyway. After a few hours, she left the show early to go back to her friend's house and try to keep her cold from getting worse. Even though the house wasn't far away, she didn't want to walk because it was cold. When she saw a car leave the parking lot, she flagged it down and asked the driver to take her somewhere. He agreed and she got home. She then began to wait for her friends to return from the show. Around 3:30 in the morning, they showed up. Before going to bed, the girls talked for a while. Brianna texted her boyfriend around 4:30 and then went to sleep. Brianna fell asleep on the couch in the kitchen while her friends slept in the next room. Brianna was not there when they woke up at 9 a.m. and began making breakfast. They didn't think much of it at first because they thought she had just moved into the bedroom because the door was shut. After about 40 minutes, one of them knocked on her door to wake her up for breakfast, but no one answered. She knocked again, but nothing happened. When she finally opened the door, the room was empty. The friends looked through the whole house and quickly found that Brianna wasn't there. But her phone, purse, clothes, and even shoes were still there. It all felt wrong. They couldn't think of a reason she would go outside in just a t-shirt since it was very cold. When they called her mom, she had no idea where her daughter was. She ran over right away. Between then and now, the friends saw something very scary. A few small red marks that looked a lot like blood were found on Brianna's pillow where she had been sleeping. Her friends were so scared that they called the cops, who arrived almost right away. There were no signs of a fight inside the house, but a few things stood out right away. Brianna's blanket that she had been sleeping under was lying a few feet away from the couch, and the toy bear that she had been using as an extra pillow was gone. The friends told the cops they never locked the front door, which was right in front of where Brianna had been sleeping. There were also no signs of forced entry. From the very beginning, police began to lean towards the idea that she had been taken. They still couldn't figure out how someone could have taken her without waking up the two girls sleeping in the next room. It didn't make sense for her to walk out into the cold in just a t-shirt. Based on the pillow Brianna had been using, forensic experts quickly came up with the most likely reason for what happened. First, they were sure that her blood was on it. Then they came to the conclusion that the killer had probably slammed her face into the pillow hard enough to keep her from crying. The crime lab also swabbed the front door handle and found DNA from a man that wasn't in the system that was not known. Since there were no more useful hints inside the house, police searched the whole city. They started going door to door in the neighborhood and asking guys to give DNA samples on their own. At the same time, detectives looked through Brianna's phone and found a bunch of texts from her boyfriend. He sent her a bunch of mean messages the night she disappeared, and her friends said they were about to break up. He was a suspect for a short time until investigators found out he was in another state at the time and couldn't have been involved in the kidnapping. Brianna's absence was the biggest news story in the city from the very beginning, and it quickly spread across the whole country. Her picture was on a lot of billboards, and the story was always being covered in the local news. The cops got about 3,000 DNA samples from people in the area, but that much work was too much for the city's crime lab to handle. The government asked the people for help and quickly raised $150,000 to pay for more tests. In the end, experts were able to look at all of the samples, but none of them matched the DNA of the person thought to be the kidnapper. As soon as the FBI joined the case, they set out to find the suspect. First, police looked into the man who had driven Brianna home that night because they thought he might have come back later to take her. When the news said that police wanted to talk to him, the man came forward, gave a DNA sample, and gave a good reason for not being responsible. This took him off the police's list of suspects. A man who lived across the street from Brianna's friend's house gave them another tip. He was sitting in his living room and told the cops that he hadn't slept that night. At about 5 a.m., he saw a shadow move in front of his window and then heard someone trying to open his front door. For a while, nothing worked to stop the noise, but at first, he didn't think much of it. He thought it was probably just a drunk person who thought his house was theirs. The search activities got bigger every day. People volunteered to join the cops. Drones flew over the area, and search dogs were used by police to look in hard-to-reach places like fields, woods, and drainage ditches. But none of it got us anywhere. Detectives didn't think this was the suspect's first crime based on the information they had. As they looked into Reno's unexplained crimes, they quickly found two that caught their attention. Just a few months before Brianna went missing, in November 2007, an unknown man beat a college student who was 21 years old. He came up to her in the parking lot, knocked her down, pulled out a gun, and beat her up. She screamed until she could barely breathe, even though he told her to be quiet. It looked like that scared him, so he ran away and dropped a pack of condoms along the way. After a month, there was another attack. This time, the victim was a student who was 22 years old and standing outside her house when a man came up behind her and squeezed her mouth and nose, knocking her out. The truck cab is where she woke up. After a few minutes, the driver pulled over and raped her while telling her not to look at him the whole time. He drove her back to her house and told her not to turn around as she walked to the door. She called the cops right away and gave them some information. The man was white, big, and had brown arms. She also talked about his pickup truck and added a scary detail. There was a child's shoe inside. There was one more scary link between the two strikes. The person who attacked both times took the victim's pants with him. Police took DNA samples from both women, and they were found to be identical. Now, the officers working on Brianna's case asked for a match to be made between the sample and the one from the door handle. This made their worst fear come true. They were dealing with a repeat predator who liked to prey on women. Sexual abuse. After hearing about this in the news, another kid spoke up. She told the police that someone had tried to break into her house one night by pulling on the front door handle so hard that it bent. However, the intruder was unable to enter. Police made a composite sketch and profile of the suspect based on information from the other two victims. The suspect was a guy of average height, between 28 and 40 years old, with a solid muscular build. Print and TV sites in the area were sent a picture of him, along with a public appeal for help identifying him. There was a lot of fear in Reno. They knew there was a serial killer working right next door and thought it would only be a matter of time before he did it again. The sales of guns and pepper spray went through the roof and women were too scared to stay home by themselves. Investigators weren't any closer to making an arrest or finding Brianna. Even though the public was putting a lot of pressure on them, it became less likely that she was still living every day. Divers were sent to look for her body in a nearby river, and hundreds of people braved the cold to help. Also, more than 5,000 tips were sent to the police, but none of them helped them find Brianna. It went on for almost a month before someone called the cops. A worker was leaving for his lunch break on February 15th. In order to save time, he chose to go to the coffee shop by cutting through an empty lot. He saw an old Christmas tree lying in a ditch and a pair of socks sticking out from behind it as he walked. As he got closer, he saw what looked like a person. He first thought someone had dumped a mannequin. It didn't take him long to figure out it was a dead body. He called the cops right away. The body parts were sent to a medical examiner so that the name of the person and the cause of death could be confirmed. 2 sets of women's pants were lying next to the body. The victim was naked except for socks. The doctor said for sure that it was Brianna. She was strangled to death and marks on her neck showed that her killer had used knickers to do it. The doctor said Brianna was killed in the house and her body was later taken away. In other words, she had been dead since the day she went missing. 1 pair of pants belonged to Brianna's friend who hadn't even known they were stolen. The other pair, on the other hand, wasn't hers. Police think the killer left them at the spot on purpose to tease them. Also, Brianna had been sexually abused and DNA from a man was found on her body. Like we thought it would, it matched the samples from the 2 earlier attacks and the one that was on the doorknob. Everyone in the city felt sick when they heard that Brianna's body had been found. A lot of people were keeping an eye on the case because they thought she might still be alive. During the weeks that followed, police kept looking for the killer. They tried following every tip, but none of them led anywhere. A few weeks later, they chose to tell the public more about what happened and said that the killer seemed to collect his victim's pants. Investigators hoped that a family member or friend might have seen something fishy, but no useful information came in. After that, the investigation pretty much stopped, even though a lot of police were still working on it. As the weeks changed into months, they were having a hard time believing that the killer had gotten away with it. But on November 1st, almost a year after the murder, everything changed. A call came in from someone who didn't want to be named. Someone said that a friend of hers found women's knickers in her boyfriend's pickup truck a while ago. When she asked him about it, his explanation sounded very fishy. There was more. This man sold his truck and left town soon after Brianna was killed. That man was James Bella, who was 27 years old, and the cops quickly found him. James used to be in the Marines and had a lot of training in martial arts. He had worked on many building projects near the university, in the area where Brianna's friend lived, so he knew the area well. At the time of Brianna's murder, he was taking on work as a builder. As the officers dug deeper, they found out that James had a violent streak. Someone he used to date told them he hit her a lot and once almost killed someone with a knife. He also broke a dog's leg for no reason one time. Police had never taken James' DNA or charged him with anything, even after all that. As soon as the police found out he had moved back to Reno, they kept an eye on him 24 hours a day. They called him too and said they wanted to talk. James agreed to meet, but he didn't even ask what the meeting was for. Police asked him where he was the night Brianna was killed. When they talked to him the next day, James said he was at his girlfriend's house, but when they asked for a DNA sample, he flatly refused. Just then the cops went to see his ex-girlfriend and she told them his story was a lie. That night, he wasn't with her. They also found out that James was married to this woman and had a 4-year-old boy together. When the police asked the boy's mother if they could get a DNA sample from him, she said yes. The killer's DNA was almost exactly the same as the child's, which meant that the crimes were likely committed by someone in the boy's close family. With all of this proof in hand, the officers went back to James, but this time it was to arrest him. A lot of charges were brought against him because his DNA had been found in 3 different cases. He still wouldn't accept he was guilty. James was put in jail until his hearing while the police worked to build their case. They learned from James' father that he had a long past of drug abuse, which was a big reason why he was kicked out of the Marines. Detectives also found his old van. Fibers from the seat covers were tested and found to be an exact match to fibers found on the clothes of another student who had been taken and driven home. His old boss also had something to say. He said James quit his job the same day Brianna's body was found and went to live in another state. When the trial started, James' lawyer tried to say that the cases were unrelated and that each crime had its own signature, but those claims didn't hold much weight because the prosecution had a lot of proof linking James to all of them. James kept laughing and even smirking during the trial, which didn't help his case. In late May 2010, just over 2 years after Brianna's murder, the jury found him guilty on all counts. The court then had to decide what to do with him, and the death penalty was an option. James' lawyer worked hard to keep him from getting the harshest sentence. He told the judge about his client's troubled childhood and how his alcoholic father would beat him often. He also talked about how well James had behaved in jail. The judge didn't care about any of that, so James was given the death penalty. Just a few months later, he got 4 more life terms for different charges. This means that he will never be free, even if his execution never happens, which is very possible. Over the next few years, James' lawyer tried more than once to get the sentence thrown out, but each time the state Supreme Court supported the death penalty. Because of this, James is still in jail and there is no set date for his execution. Brianna's family pushed for a new law in Nevada that would require police to get DNA from anyone arrested for a violent crime after he was caught. Some people think that if there had been such a rule earlier, James would have been caught after his first attack on a student, and Brianna might not have died. It's too bad that her death wasn't the last blow to the family. It's been 10 years since she was killed, and her 19-year-old cousin has still not been found. Her folks were shocked when she told them she was leaving for another state with a new boyfriend. She then stopped answering her phone. Her family is scared that something bad happened to her and still hopes she'll come home. We are uncovering the haunting story of Shelby Thornburg, a vibrant young woman whose promising life ended in unimaginable horror. Houston, Texas, November 2015, 20-something. This is Shelby Jean Thornburg Crocker, behind the bright lights of a hotel on the side of the road. Police found more than just the evidence of a crime in her room. They also found the start of a story. Each detail and unanswered question adds to the mystery of a story with secret dangers, trust that is quickly broken, and a predator that is easy to spot. Shelby, who was 20 years old at the time, had to meet a client in the evening on November 4, 2015. When the call came in at 8 p.m., it was from that client. Records show that the client told Shelby he was on his way. Around 8:34 p.m., Shelby got another text message from the same customer. Said, "Hey, I'm here." Then Shelby sent a text message to her boss, Marcus Mark D. Johnson, 10 minutes later with the code word GUD. Marcus was in charge of finding clients for Shelby, and they came up with a way for Shelby to let Marcus know that a client had been met, paid, and was ready to do business. When Marcus got this text, it made him feel better and he didn't bother Shelby for a while. Herb would usually tell Marcus that the job was done and everything was fine after the client left. Took Marcus a long time to get that call or text though. Marcus tried to call Shelby because of this, but she didn't answer. This was strange. Because this was a planned meeting, the client had to end things and leave when the time was up. There was a limit to how long they could stay in Shelby's flat. Marcus chose to go to Shelby's flat and check on her himself. He stopped in his tracks as soon as he opened Shelby's door and walked into the living room. What he saw registered in his eyes, and it's amazing he didn't pass out from fear at that very moment. Shelby was still and lying face down on the bed in the living room. No one else was in the room with her. The client seemed to have already left. He was scared when he saw red spots on the bed and the wall next to it. Marcus quickly came to the conclusion that Shelby had been killed. Marcus rushed out of the flat right away and called 911. His first words to the receptionist when they picked up were, "Someone is dead. Someone killed my girl." He was born in Decatur, Texas on August 18, 1995. Shelby's mom had an affair with a guy named Shannon Crocker, while she was not with her partner Robert. It was during one of these times that she got pregnant. It was Shannon's mom, Leslie Jean Crocker, who told her that she was pregnant. Shannon then pretty much left her to handle the pregnancy on her own. Shelby never had a father role in her life. This was going to be very upsetting for her and the effects would last for decades. Robert also found it hard to believe that Leslie had cheated on him, since their relationship was already in bad shape. But he chose to stay with Shelby anyway, kind of like a father figure, but not really. Robert was like a father to Shelby, but sadly it was only on paper. It's safe to say that Leslie and Robert's relationship is at best messy and unstable. She was a lot younger than Robert. Robert was in his mid-20s when she had her first daughter, Christina. She was only 18. Also, the fact that Robert spent most of his time in jail instead of at home because he was abusing drugs and doing other illegal things didn't help. On the other hand, Leslie, who was raising 2 girls by herself, struggled with depression, and quickly became addicted. Leslie got in trouble with the law once for writing bad checks. For two little girls who had no one to watch them, it was just not a good place to be. Christina raised Shelby, and the two would become very close. Shelby was safe with Christina. Even when she was a little girl, she did a great job of keeping her safe from all the bad things in the world. In 2001, Leslie was found guilty of fraud. In 2004, Christina and Shelby were put into the foster system after Robert and Leslie both lost their parenting rights. After a while, Robert, who was no longer in jail, took them in. But after everything that had happened, things would never be the same for the girls again. Robert took advantage of Shelby and Christina many times. Christina was told she had to leave the house when she got pregnant and had a boy. Sadly, the past happened again. Not long after that, Shelby had to work like an adult. She got pregnant with a man who went by the name Kurt Fisher. At the time of this, he was 18 and Shelby was only 14. At about the same time, Shelby finally reported Robert to Child Protective Services and he was arrested for good. Kurt was also charged with assault and sent to jail. 9 months after that, on May 11, 2011, Shelby had a boy and named him Logan. That being said, Shelby was too young to care for a baby while she was in foster care, so she had to give Logan up for adoption. Logan was finally taken in by a loving family, and Shelby was even allowed to visit him sometimes. After about a year, though, tragedy struck again. Leslie, who was Shelby and Christina's mother, died on August 9, 2012. She was 38 years old. She wasn't the best mom, but Shelby and Christina were still heartbroken when she died. Shelby was eager to make her life better, even though it wasn't perfect. But it wasn't as easy as it seemed. Because of problems with her breathing as a child, Shelby had a lot of trouble with being overweight, which made her feel very insecure. She couldn't run outside or play with the other kids because she was afraid of having a bad asthma attack. She gained weight out of control and became severely obese because of this, but she was able to get over a lot of it later in life. Her goal was to become a nurse assistant by 2014, but once again, fate had other ideas. Unfortunately, this time the baby girl didn't make it. She got pregnant again. Shelby's emotions were hit hard by this loss, and from there she got into trouble with the law, and her mental health got worse. As a child, she had seen adults doing things in her home, and she started doing them herself. This was something she had almost avoided in the past. Now, though, the idea was much more appealing. You may remember that Shelby was unhappy with her weight and wanted to change how she looked, but those were pricey. She thought that once she knew how to do it, she would be one step closer to becoming a model. She knew that working as an adult would only last for a short time. It was her only choice because she needed money quickly. So, she went to Houston and got a job working with adults. Things quickly went bad, though. She was jailed for solicitation, and after she got out of jail, she met Marcus D. Johnson, who used the name Mark D. Marcus to treat Shelby to all the nice things in life. Marcus would take her on fancy trips to Las Vegas, Los Angeles, and the Bahamas. And Shelby and Marcus would share photos of their trips on social media. Marcus looked like Shelby's boyfriend from a third-person point of view. That wasn't the case, though. Theodore D. was Shelby's adult work manager, which meant he set up all of her meetings and customers. Marcus was deeply in love with Shelby. Marcus must have been making a lot of money because she had a lot of clients. That could be why he spent so much on her. Soon after, Marcus even moved Shelby to a nicer, safer Houston apartment building. But they quickly ran into trouble. It was hard for Marcus and Shelby to get clients because of strict security checks, and when there were no clients, there was no money. Shelby had to be moved to a less safe complex, the Conquistador Apartments, in the 7575 block of Bel Air Boulevard, by Marcus. She was put in flat 3B. Adults often worked in this area, so it wasn't safe for a young woman to be there by herself, but Shelby had to do what she had to do. Again, this was the only choice Shelby had. She mostly worked from her flat, which wasn't safe because complete strangers knew where she lived, but soon there were problems. She was caught again. The first time, she got away with it, but not this time. She knew she was going to jail for a long time, so she hired a lawyer to try to get the charges dropped or lowered. Things were not going well, and it looked like she would be locked up for a long time. That didn't happen, though. because Shelby was found dead not long after these charges were brought against her. When the cops got there, after Marcus called 911, they didn't know what to do. There were no signs of forced entry or theft, and the most worrisome thing was that there were no signs of a fight. Marcus was asked about Shelby's daily life, like who she met that night and what she did. The police now knew about the mystery client, the man who was meant to meet Shelby for business. This man was, of course, their main suspect, but there was something wrong. He was unknown. It was suspicious that they only had a phone number. The phone that was used to call Shelby was a burner phone that had been turned on before she was killed. The cops had to learn more about this man, but they also checked out the flat and swabbed it for evidence. Many questions were still unanswered, so Shelby's body was taken away for an autopsy. During this time, Christina, Shelby's sister, got the terrible news early on November 5th. Christina couldn't believe it. She didn't know all the scary details, but she did know one thing for sure. Her sister, whom she had always tried to keep safe, was dead. Soon the cops had the autopsy report, and what they found was horrifying and hard to believe. For some reason, Shelby's single wound on her neck became a big talking point in the case. The cut was a single, planned, quick, and deep slash. I won't go into graphic details. Based on the depth and intensity, it looked like the attacker put about 1,000 pounds of pressure on a specific spot. Shelby didn't have time to react or protect herself because of where she was before the attack. This is why she didn't have any hesitation or defensive wounds. There was a lot of doubt in the autopsy report. The cops thought the killer had to have had military or field training. Based on what they found, the attack wasn't sloppy, it was planned, and thought out. Other things the cops looked for in the flat were DNA, but they mostly failed. They did find used birth control packing, which made them think that Shelby and the killer touched each other, and then something went wrong. The killer was smart because they didn't leave much DNA behind. One thing was different, though. The cops found hair on Shelby's body that didn't belong to her. Shelby had long blonde hair. Some of the hair that was found was dark and short, as if it came from a man. They also found hair from women, but it could have been tainted. In any case, the cops sent these hair samples to Cody's to be tested and matched with other hair samples. Soon after, though, they came to a dead end. Not a match. Shelby's case had no leads and no movement for 5 months. Her family was having a rough time. But after 5 months, the cops finally showed one piece of evidence. CCTV footage from the lobby of the apartment building. The cops were able to figure out who was coming into the lobby and going towards Shelby's flat based on her texts with the unknown client. This video was creepy and hard to understand in every way. A man walked into the lobby at 8:34 p.m. as seen on security video. It was a light shirt with long sleeves and he was on his phone. The strangest thing was that he wore sunglasses on his face instead of his head when he was outside at night. The man walked steadily and with purpose. He looked big and tall. He was very big compared to Shelby's small size. His steps were slow and steady, like he was on a mission. He was seen going upstairs and then leaving 23 minutes later. What's amazing is that he didn't even sweat. His clothes were smooth. His glasses didn't fall off. There wasn't a hair out of place. It's hard to believe how long it took him to get in, kill, and leave. Even stranger, no one knew who he was. In adult work, clients often stay anonymous, but it's scary to not know anything about them. Marcus didn't even know the client's name, but he was ready to leave the locked room with his claimed main girl. The fake phone that was used to call Shelby was bought at a nearby Walmart a month before the murder and turned on a week before the murder. The phone was gone after that. The client had written many times online without giving their name. They were looking for small, blonde women. Shelby looked like he fit all the criteria. It had been 5 months when the police called Walmart to ask for surveillance tape. The store no longer had the video that was important. In other words, the investigation had hit a second dead end. Where did Shelby go? And who was this guy in sunglasses? There are several ideas. First, there's the hitman idea, which Shelby's family kind of backs up. You may remember that she was arrested for begging right before she was killed. She was apparently getting those charges dropped with the help of a lawyer. It is thought that she was killed on purpose. Shelby is said to have been an informant for the police and decided to testify in exchange for having her charges dropped. Someone in her line of work found out about this and hired a hitman to kill her while dressed as a customer. There is some truth to this idea because human trafficking rings in her area have been broken up more than once. The cops say those arrests have nothing to do with her death though. That's it for now. But if secret sting operations were involved, would they ever say it out loud? Most likely not. If this is true, the truth might never come out. If the name of one informant is made public, the whole investigation could fall apart. Many women may have been involved with this operation, and some of them were close to Shelby. This theory not only makes sense, but it seems very possible. That's just what I think. Some people also thought Marcus was guilty. He found her body and moved her from a safer flat to a sketchy one so he could get more guests. A lot of people thought it was odd that Marcus didn't know the client's name. He was in charge of checking out people. His best client and biggest source of income was Shelby. He was the one who should have kept her safe. After all, if he lost her, he would lose his job. First, police did look into Marcus, but they found no evidence linking him to the crime. They thought it was case closed because there was no proof linking him to anything. He should have done a better job of checking out clients, but there's no reason he would want her dead. The police strongly back the next idea, which is that someone is a serial killer. The FBI joined in too. Police think that Shelby's death fits the pattern of a serial killer. There's a chance that the client was a killer who only liked killing short, blonde women for adult work. There is evidence that the man looked for women who met these requirements. This is a common way for serial killers to work, like how people tried to copy Jack the Ripper. The cops and FBI think the killer has done many crimes and may have done them in both Louisiana and Texas. Her name is on the FBI's website as someone who may have been killed by a serial killer. It doesn't matter what the truth is, her killer is still out there and probably looking for his next target right now. As of now, the hairpieces found at the scene have not been put through the genealogy process. People are shocked. This took place in 2015, not many years ago. Even though they are pricey, progress in DNA and genetic technology could lead to a big step forward. Now it looks like all that's left is to get the money for gene DNA tests. But there may be more going on behind the scenes that we don't know about. The sister of Shelby, Christina, works very hard to keep her case going. She made a Facebook page where people can share information and talk about Shelby's life and problems. She also contacted Christina and dug deep into her death and life. Gavin even improved the video of the lobby. Really, someone should know who that is. Very little information about Shelby is known to the public. Gavin's work, and that of other true crime YouTubers and podcasters who brought this case to light, is what made it possible. Even though it's been almost 10 years, Christina still hopes that the police will solve the murder of her sister and give her the peace of mind she needs. Shelby was a person, and she didn't deserve to have her life taken that way. No matter what she did for work, whether she wanted to or not. People shouldn't keep her family in the dark or treat them badly. Everyone who has been hurt deserves justice. Not just her. Nobody should be treated badly, no matter what they do for a living or even if they do. Everyone has hopes and dreams that they can make the world a better place, or at least their own life or the life of their family. The truth is that it doesn't matter what you think about Shelby. What's important is that her killer hasn't been caught yet. Every woman who fits this description is in great danger. The Robbie family consisted of Ryan, a successful 45-year-old investment banker with penchant for Brooks Brothers suits, his second wife Mandy, a striking 38-year-old interior designer with a flair for the dramatic, and Ryan's son from his first marriage, 20-year-old Nathaniel, a college dropout with a chip on his shoulder and a history of minor run-ins with the law. To their neighbors, the Robbies appeared to be living the American dream. Ryan's career was thriving. Mandy's design business was gaining traction among Oakdale's elite, and Nathaniel, despite his academic setbacks, seemed to be finding his footing working at a local garage. Little did anyone suspect that beneath this carefully cultivated image lay a powder keg of secrets, jealousies, and dangerous desires. Ryan Robbie's first marriage to Helena, Nathaniel's mother, had been a whirlwind romance that quickly soured. Helena, a free-spirited artist, found herself stifled by Ryan's rigid lifestyle and expectations. Their arguments, once confined to hushed whispers behind closed doors, escalated into shouting matches that echoed through their home, leaving a young Nathaniel cowering in his room. The divorce, when it came, was bitter and protracted. Helena fought for full custody, painting Ryan as a cold, neglectful father. In the end, the court granted joint custody, but the damage was done. Nathaniel, then only 10 years old at the time, was torn between two warring parents. His loyalty constantly tested. Helena's subsequent move to the West Coast for her art career left Nathaniel feeling abandoned, fueling a resentment that would smolder for years to come. Ryan threw himself into his work, climbing the corporate ladder with single-minded determination. It was at a charity gala, 3 years after his divorce, that he met Mandy Rossi. She was captivating, with her raven hair and quick wit, a breath of fresh air in Ryan's staid world. Mandy saw in Ryan not just financial security, but a chance at the stable family life she'd never had growing up in foster care. Their courtship was swift, and within a year, Mandy had moved into the Robbie home. Nathaniel, now 14 and in the throes of adolescent angst, viewed his new stepmother with suspicion and hostility. Mandy's attempts to bond with her stepson were met with cold indifference at best and open hostility at worst. As the years passed, the divide between Mandy and Nathaniel grew. Ryan, eager to avoid conflict, turned a blind eye to the tension, convincing himself that time would heal all wounds. Mandy, frustrated by her inability to connect with Nathaniel, gradually withdrew, focusing on her burgeoning design career and the social circles it opened up to her. Nathaniel's teenage years were marked by rebellion, skipping classes, experimenting with drugs, and petty theft. Each incident widened the chasm between him and his father, with Mandy often caught in the crossfire. By the time Nathaniel grudgingly enrolled in the local community college, the Robbie home had become a battleground of unspoken grievances and simmering resentments, setting the stage for the explosive events to come. The catalyst for the Robbie family's unraveling came on a sweltering July afternoon. Nathaniel, having dropped out of college and now working as a mechanic, returned home earlier than usual, nursing a hangover in a foul mood. The house was quiet, Ryan away on a business trip and Mandy presumably at a client meeting. Seeking aspirin for his pounding headache, Nathaniel entered the master bedroom, a space he usually avoided. As he rummaged through the medicine cabinet, a buzzing sound caught his attention. Mandy's phone, forgotten on the nightstand, lit up with a new message. Perhaps it was the lingering effects of the previous night's indulgences, or simply a malicious impulse. But Nathaniel found himself reaching for the device. The message preview on the lock screen made his eyes widen. "Can't wait to see you later, my love." Excerpt. His stepmother's phone was locked, but this single message was a key to a Pandora's box of secrets. Over the next hour, Nathaniel sat on his parents' bed, his headache forgotten as more messages arrived, each one more incriminating than the last. He learned that the sender was one Xavier Krasinski, a name he vaguely recognized as a client of Mandy's design business. The messages painted a vivid picture of a torrid affair that had been going on for months. There were references to clandestine meetings, passionate encounters, and promises of a future together. As the reality of his discovery sank in, a mix of emotions washed over Nathaniel. There was disgust at the thought of his stepmother's infidelity, a twisted sense of satisfaction at having ammunition against the woman he'd resented for years, and beneath it all, a spark of opportunity. When Mandy returned home that evening, she found Nathaniel waiting for her in the kitchen, an unsettling smirk playing on his lips. The air was charged with tension as he casually asked about her day, his eyes glinting with newfound knowledge. Mandy, sensing something amiss, answered cautiously, unaware that her carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down around her. Nathaniel wasted no time in revealing his hand. With a casualness that belied the weight of his words, he mentioned Xavier's name, watching as the color drained from Mandy's face. He laid out what he knew, savoring each flinch and gasp from his stepmother as he recounted the details of her affair. Mandy's initial denials quickly gave way to desperate pleas as Nathaniel made his intentions clear. He wanted money, $1,000 a month in exchange for his silence. The irony wasn't lost on him. For years, he'd resented Mandy's presence in his life, and now he saw an opportunity to profit from it. Her voice shaking, Mandy tried to reason with him. She spoke of family loyalty, of the pain this would cause Ryan, of the potential to tear their lives apart. But Nathaniel was unmoved. With cold calculation, he pointed out that it was Mandy who had jeopardized their family with her infidelity. He was merely capitalizing on her mistake. The negotiations were tense, with Mandy trying to bargain the amount down and Nathaniel standing firm. In the end, faced with the prospect of losing everything, her marriage, her social standing, her carefully cultivated image, Mandy capitulated. She agreed to Nathaniel's terms, her voice hollow with defeat, as she promised to make the first payment the following day. As Nathaniel left the kitchen, a sense of power surged through him. He had the upper hand for the first time in years, and he intended to make the most of it. Mandy, left alone, her mind racing as she grappled with the magnitude of her predicament. The first payment was made in cash, handed over in a plain envelope in the garage, away from prying eyes. Nathaniel counted the bills slowly, relishing Mandy's discomfort. With a smirk, he reminded her that this was just the beginning. In the weeks that followed, a new dynamic took hold in the Robbie household. On the surface, little had changed. Ryan remained oblivious, absorbed in his work. But beneath the veneer of normalcy, a current of tension crackled. Mandy walked on eggshells, her once confident demeanor replaced by nervous glances and forced smiles. Nathaniel, emboldened by his newfound power, became more openly disrespectful, knowing Mandy wouldn't dare challenge him. As summer waned, the weight of her secret and the strain of meeting Nathaniel's demands began to take their toll on Mandy. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of a nightmare that would spiral far beyond her control. As weeks turned into months, the fragile equilibrium in the Robbie home began to crumble. Nathaniel, intoxicated by his newfound power, grew bolder in his demands. The monthly payments, once a source of smug satisfaction, now seemed paltry compared to the control he wielded over his stepmother's life. Started small, snide comments at the dinner table, thinly veiled threats disguised as innocent conversation. Nathaniel would casually mention Xavier's name in Ryan's presence, watching Mandy's face contort with panic before smoothly changing the subject. He reveled in her fear, in the way her hands would shake as she poured the wine, in the dark circles that began to form under her eyes as sleepless nights took their toll. By October, the original agreement no longer sufficed. Nathaniel cornered Mandy in the laundry room, demanding an increase to $1,500 a month. When Mandy protested, citing the difficulty of explaining the withdrawals to Ryan, Nathaniel's eyes hardened. He reminded her of the photos he'd discovered on her phone. Intimate images never meant for his eyes, and how easily they could find their way to Ryan's inbox. Mandy's world was unraveling. The stress of maintaining her secret life with Xavier, coupled with Nathaniel's escalating blackmail, was pushing her to the brink. Her design business began to suffer as she missed appointments and turned in subpar work. Clients, once charmed by her vivacity, now complained about her distracted demeanor and lack of creativity. As autumn progressed, Nathaniel's demands extended beyond money. He began to treat the house as if it were his own, throwing parties when Ryan was away on business trips, leaving Mandy to clean up the aftermath. He borrowed Ryan's prized vintage car without permission, returning it with mysterious dents and scratches. Each transgression was met with a pointed look that silenced any protest Mandy might have mustered. The power dynamic in the house had shifted dramatically. Nathaniel now ruled the roost, his every whim catered to by an increasingly desperate Mandy. She found herself walking a tightrope, trying to meet Nathaniel's demands while maintaining the facade of normalcy for Ryan. As Thanksgiving approached, bringing with it the prospect of extended family gatherings and increased scrutiny, Mandy knew something had to give. She couldn't continue like this indefinitely. With growing dread, she realized she needed help. and there was only one person she could turn to. In early December, Mandy made a decision that would set in motion a chain of irreversible events. After weeks of agonizing, she confided in Xavier about the blackmail. The meeting took place in a nondescript motel on the outskirts of town, their usual rendezvous point. As Mandy poured out the whole sordid tale, her voice cracking with emotion, Xavier's expression darkened. His initial shock gave way to a cold, calculating anger that sent a chill down Mandy's spine. What Mandy didn't know that Xavier Krasinski was not merely the successful businessman and charming lover she believed him to be. Beneath his polished exterior lay a history of violence and criminal connections that he'd carefully concealed from her. Xavier's past included a stint in prison for aggravated assault, associations with local organized crime, and a reputation for handling problems with ruthless efficiency. As he listened to Mandy's story, wheels began turning in his mind. This wasn't just about protecting their relationship anymore. It was about eliminating a threat. He assured Mandy that he would take care of everything, his tone soothing but his eyes hard as flint. Mandy, desperate for a solution and blinded by her feelings for Xavier, felt a wave of relief wash over her. Finally, she thought someone else would shoulder this burden. Over the next few days, Xavier set his plan in motion. He reached out to old contacts, gathering information on Nathaniel's habits, his workplace, his favorite haunts. He was meticulous in his planning, leaving nothing to chance. Unbeknownst to Mandy, Xavier had no intention of simply buying Nathaniel's silence or reasoning with him. In Xavier's world, problems like this were solved permanently, and collateral damage was an acceptable risk. As Christmas decorations began to appear in the windows of Oakdale's homes, Xavier made his move. He approached Nathaniel outside the garage where he worked, his demeanor friendly but his eyes cold. The conversation that followed was brief but loaded with unspoken threats. Xavier made it clear that he knew about the blackmail and that Nathaniel was playing a dangerous game. Nathaniel, however, was not as easily cowed as Xavier had anticipated. Years of resentment and the taste of power had hardened him. Instead of backing down, he sneered at Xavier, suggesting that perhaps Ryan would be interested in knowing about his wife's extracurricular activities. As Xavier walked away, his genial mask slipping to reveal a flash of genuine anger, both knew that the stakes had just been raised exponentially. The game was no longer just about money or secrets. It had become a battle of wills with potentially deadly consequences. The week before Christmas, Xavier decided to take more direct action. His warning to Nathaniel had fallen on deaf ears, and he knew that Mandy was at her breaking point under the guise of a pre-holiday drinks invitation. Xavier lured Nathaniel to a secluded area near the old mill on the outskirts of town. The winter air was crisp. He offered a substantial sum, $50,000, for Nathaniel to leave and never contact Mandy again. It was meant to be a final generous offer before resorting to more drastic measures. Nathaniel, however, had severely underestimated the danger he was in. Emboldened by months of successfully manipulating Mandy, he scoffed at Xavier's offer. In a display of youthful arrogance, he countered with an outrageous demand: $250,000, or he'd expose both Mandy and Xavier to Ryan and the entire community. What happened next was a blur of motion and violence. Xavier, his patience exhausted, lashed out with a speed and ferocity that caught Nathaniel completely off guard. The ensuing struggle was brief but brutal. Xavier's experience and ruthlessness quickly overwhelmed Nathaniel, leaving the younger man battered and bloodied on the frozen ground. As Nathaniel lay there tasting blood and fear for the first time, Xavier delivered a final warning. This was his last chance to walk away, to forget everything he'd seen and heard. The next time, Xavier promised, there would be no warnings, no offers, only consequences. Shaken and in pain, Nathaniel stumbled home that night, his mind reeling. The reality of his situation had finally hit home. He was no longer the one in control. He was in over his head, tangled in a web far more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. For a brief moment, as he nursed his wounds in the solitude of his room, Nathaniel considered taking Xavier's advice and disappearing. But as the pain of his injuries gave way to a burning anger, his resolve hardened. He wasn't going to be intimidated. If anything, this attack had only strengthened his determination to see this through to the end, whatever that might be. As Christmas approached, the atmosphere in the Robbie home grew increasingly tense. Mandy, already stretched to her breaking point, now had to contend with Nathaniel's escalating demands and increasingly erratic behavior. The bruises from his encounter with Xavier had faded, but his anger had only intensified. Ryan, no longer able to ignore the palpable tension, began asking more pointed questions. The cracks in Mandy's carefully constructed facade were beginning to show, and she found herself struggling to maintain the illusion of normalcy. It all came to a head on Christmas Eve. The Robbies were hosting their annual holiday party, the house filled with the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses. Mandy, dressed in a stunning dress, moved among the guests with practiced ease, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. Nathaniel, sullen and nursing a whiskey in the corner, watched his stepmother with barely concealed contempt. As the night wore on and the alcohol flowed freely, his inhibitions lowered dangerously. In a moment of reckless anger, he approached Mandy as she chatted with some of Ryan's colleagues. Whispering in her ear, he demanded another payment, $5,000 this time, by the end of the week. When Mandy, her face pale but composed, tried to quietly reason with him, Nathaniel's control slipped. Mandy, her heart pounding, quickly excused herself and practically dragged Nathaniel to the study. Once there, she unleashed months of pent-up fear and frustration. In hushed but intense tones, she told Nathaniel that she was done. She wouldn't pay him anymore. If he wanted to tell Ryan, then so be it. She was tired of living under the weight of his threats. Nathaniel, caught off guard by her sudden defiance, lashed out verbally, threatening not just to expose her affair but to destroy her reputation, her marriage, her entire life. He stormed out of the study, leaving Mandy trembling but oddly relieved. She had finally stood up to him, consequences be damned. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Mandy knew she had reached a point of no return. Something had to be done, and soon. With shaking hands, she reached for her phone and sent a text to Xavier. "We need to talk, it's urgent." January 15th dawned cold and gray, a fitting backdrop for the tragedy about to unfold. Mandy had spent the week since Christmas in a state of constant anxiety, jumping at every sound, flinching every time Nathaniel entered a room. Her conversation with Xavier had been brief but intense. He had listened to her desperate pleas, his face an unreadable mask, and simply said, "I'll take care of it." Those words, which had initially brought her relief, now haunted her. What exactly did Xavier mean? As much as she wanted an end to Nathaniel's blackmail, the thought of what that end might entail filled her with dread. Nathaniel, for his part, had been unusually quiet since the Christmas Eve confrontation. He seemed to be weighing his options, unsure of how to proceed now that Mandy had called his bluff. The uncertainty only added to the suffocating tension in the house. That evening, Ryan was working late as he often did. Mandy sat in the living room, absently flipping through a magazine, her mind elsewhere. The sound of Nathaniel's car pulling into the driveway made her stiffen. She heard the front door open, his footsteps in the hall, then silence. Upstairs, Nathaniel entered his room, his mind made up. He was done playing games. Tomorrow he would tell his father everything. Let the chips fall where they may. He was so absorbed in his thoughts that he didn't hear the soft footsteps approaching his door. The knock, when it came, startled him. Expecting Mandy, he opened the door with a sneer already forming on his lips. The sight of Xavier standing there, his expression grim, wiped the sneer away instantly. What happened next was a flurry of violence that lasted mere minutes but would have repercussions for years to come. Xavier forced his way into the room, closing the door behind him. Words were exchanged. Threats, pleas, desperate bargaining. But Xavier hadn't come to negotiate. The first blow caught Nathaniel by surprise, sending him stumbling back against his desk. He fought back, his youth and desperation lending him strength, but Xavier's experience and cold determination proved too much. The struggle was brutal but brief. Downstairs, Mandy heard the muffled sounds of the fight, her heart racing. She stood at the bottom of the stairs, paralyzed by indecision and fear. A part of her knew she should intervene, call for help, do something. But another part, the part that had endured months of torment and blackmail, kept her rooted to the spot. The silence when it fell was deafening. Mandy's legs trembled as she forced herself to climb the stairs. She found Xavier standing in Nathaniel's doorway, his shirt spattered with blood, his eyes cold and empty. Behind him, she caught a glimpse of a still form on the floor and had to stifle a scream. Xavier's voice was calm, almost soothing as he guided her back downstairs. He spoke of accidents, of self-defense, of necessary evils. Mandy heard the words but couldn't process them. All she could think about was the sight of Nathaniel's lifeless body and the knowledge that in a way she was responsible for what had happened. As Xavier methodically began to clean up, to erase the evidence of what had transpired, Mandy sat in the kitchen, her mind reeling. The nightmare she had been living for months had just taken a turn she could never have imagined. And she knew with chilling certainty that her life would never be the same again. The hours that followed Nathaniel's death were a blur of frantic activity and cold calculation. Xavier, drawing on skills honed through years of criminal association, took charge of the situation with ruthless efficiency. Mandy, still in shock, found herself following Xavier's instructions mechanically. They cleaned the room meticulously, removing any trace of Xavier's presence. Nathaniel's body was wrapped in a tarp from the garage, then loaded into the trunk of Xavier's car under the cover of darkness. As dawn broke, Xavier drove away with grim purpose, leaving Mandy alone in the house with the impossible task of maintaining normalcy. When Ryan returned home later that morning, exhausted from his late night at the office, Mandy forced herself to greet him with a smile that felt like it might shatter her face. The day passed in a haze of mundane activities and internal panic. Mandy cooked, cleaned, and chatted with Ryan, all while her mind screamed with the knowledge of what had happened. When Ryan casually asked about Nathaniel's whereabouts, Mandy heard herself reply that he had mentioned going on a road trip with some friends. As days turned into weeks, the lie grew more elaborate. Mandy created a digital trail, sending emails from Nathaniel's account to Ryan, describing fictional adventures in various cities. She fielded concerned calls from Nathaniel's workplace, spinning tales of family emergencies and extended leaves of absence. Xavier had disposed of Nathaniel's body in an abandoned quarry several hours away, weighing it down to ensure it wouldn't be found. He meticulously eliminated any evidence that could connect them to Nathaniel's disappearance. For a while, it seemed their hastily constructed cover-up might hold. Life in Oakdale continued, with only a ripple of concern about Nathaniel's prolonged absence. But as winter gave way to spring and Nathaniel's silence stretched on, questions began to multiply. Ryan's initial unconcern turned to worry, then to suspicion. Mandy found herself trapped in a web of lies that grew more complex and fragile with each passing day, knowing that it was only a matter of time before everything unraveled. Detective Sandra Sloan had seen her fair share of missing persons cases in her 15 years with the Oakdale Police Department, but something about Nathaniel Robbie's disappearance nagged at her from the start. The pieces didn't quite fit. The sudden departure, the sporadic communication, the lack of financial activity. As spring bloomed in Oakdale, Detective Sloan dug deeper into the Robbie family dynamics. She interviewed friends, colleagues, and neighbors, slowly piecing together a picture of a household fraught with tension. The more she learned, the more her suspicions grew. Ryan Robbie, initially reluctant to involve the police, became an increasingly vocal advocate for finding his son. His faith in Mandy's explanations had begun to waver, and he pressed for a more thorough investigation. This pressure, combined with Detective Sloan's relentless pursuit of the truth, began to expose the cracks in Mandy's carefully constructed narrative. The breakthrough came in late April, when one of Nathaniel's co-workers at the garage came forward with crucial information. He recalled overhearing a heated argument between Nathaniel and Mandy just before Christmas, with mentions of money and threats. This revelation shifted the entire focus of the investigation. Detective Sloan brought Mandy in for questioning, subjecting her to hours of intense interrogation. Mandy, worn down by months of guilt and fear, began to falter. Her story, once seamless, now showed inconsistencies. She stumbled over dates, contradicted her earlier statements, and grew visibly agitated when pressed about her relationship with Nathaniel. As Mandy's composure crumbled, Detective Sloan sensed she was on the verge of a breakthrough. She decided to take a risk, bluffing about evidence they didn't actually have. She mentioned phone records showing frequent contact with an unknown number around the time of Nathaniel's disappearance, implying they knew about Xavier's involvement. The gambit worked. Mandy, believing the police knew far more than they actually did, broke down. Through tears and gasping sobs, she confessed to the affair, the blackmail and her knowledge of Nathaniel's fate. She implicated Xavier, portraying herself as a terrified bystander to his actions. With Mandy's confession, the case broke wide open. An APB was issued for Xavier Krasinski, and search teams were dispatched to the quarry where Nathaniel's body had been hidden. As news of the confession spread through Oakdale, the community reeled from the shocking revelations. The picture-perfect family on Maple Street had harbored darker secrets than anyone could have imagined. In the days following Mandy's confession, Oakdale became the center of a media frenzy. Those vans lined Maple Street, reporters clamoring for any tidbit of information about the scandalous murder that had rocked the quiet suburb. Detective Sloan, now heading a task force dedicated to the case, worked tirelessly to bring all the perpetrators to justice thanks to Detective Sloan's skillful coordination with state and federal authorities. Xavier was apprehended at a bus station in Nevada, attempting to cross into Mexico. His arrest was the final piece of the puzzle. Under intense interrogation, Xavier eventually corroborated much of Mandy's story, though he attempted to paint himself as a man driven to desperate measures by love. He revealed the location of key evidence, including the murder weapon and some of Nathaniel's personal effects, which he had kept as a twisted sort of trophy. As the full extent of the conspiracy came to light, the impact on those involved was profound. Ryan Robbie, confronted with the brutal truth of his wife's infidelity and his son's death, withdrew from public life. Friends reported that he seemed a shell of his former self, devastated by the twin betrayals of the two people he had trusted most. The community of Oakdale, once so proud of its safe, wholesome image, was forced to confront the darkness that had festered beneath the surface. For Detective Sloan, the resolution of the case was bittersweet. While she took pride in unraveling the complex web of lies and bringing the perpetrators to justice, she couldn't shake the feeling that if she had pieced things together sooner, a young man's life might have been saved. In the end, justice was served, but it brought little comfort to those most affected. Xavier, with his history of violence and his role as the primary actor in Nathaniel's death, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Mandy, despite her attempts to paint herself as a victim of circumstance, was found guilty of conspiracy and accessory to murder. She received a 25-year sentence with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Ryan Robbie, a broken man, sold the family home and left Oakdale, unable to bear the constant reminders of his loss and betrayal. He retreated to a quiet life in another state, where he could grieve in private and attempt to rebuild some semblance of a life. The case left an indelible mark on Oakdale. The community, once known for its low crime rate and family-friendly atmosphere, now found itself grappling with a new, unwelcome notoriety.